Why would anyone still shoot that old cartridge? My grandfather used that in Korea. The young specialist's voice carried the easy confidence of someone who had never been proven wrong about anything that mattered. He was examining the rifle case that the elderly visitor had brought to the National Guard Armory's annual marksmanship competition, his tone mixing amusement with genuine confusion. Inside the case lay a Winchester Model 70, its walnut stock worn smooth by decades of handling, its barrel stamped with markings that identified it as chambered in 3006 Springfield. Around the specialist, 3 other soldiers nodded in agreement, their own rifles chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor and 308 Winchester, the modern darlings of the precision shooting world. The old man with the silver hair and steady hands said nothing. He simply lifted his rifle from the case and began walking toward the 1,000-yard line. What those young soldiers were about to witness would change everything. They thought they knew about ballistics, history, and the cartridge that helped win 2 world wars. If you believe in respecting the weapons and the warriors who carried them, type "honor" in the comments before we continue. The man's name was Walter Jessup, and he had turned 81 years old 3 weeks before that October morning at Camp Beauregard, Louisiana. He had received an invitation to the competition from a former student who now served as the unit's master sergeant, a man named Darnell Price, who had learned to shoot under Walter's instruction at a civilian marksmanship program nearly 20 years earlier. Darnell had watched the old man put rounds through the same hole at distances that made other shooters shake their heads in disbelief. He knew what Walter could do with that Winchester, and he thought the young soldiers in his unit could benefit from seeing it firsthand. What Darnell hadn't anticipated was how quickly those young soldiers would dismiss the old veteran before he ever fired a shot. The specialist who had made the comment about grandfathers was named Tyler Brennan. He was 24 years old, had qualified expert on his M4 carbine 3 times running, and had recently purchased a custom precision rifle chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor that had cost him nearly $4,000. Tyler consumed shooting content voraciously, following dozens of accounts that broke down ballistics, compared cartridges, and analysed the latest developments in long-range shooting technology. He knew the numbers by heart. The 6.5 Creedmoor offered superior ballistic coefficient, less wind drift, reduced recoil, and flatter trajectory than almost any cartridge in its class. It was the future of precision shooting. The 3006, by contrast, was something his grandfather had stories about. A relic from an era before anyone understood modern ballistics. A cartridge that belonged in museums and hunting camps, not on a competitive firing line. "Sergeant Price," Tyler said as Darnell approached the line, "you really invited this guy to shoot with us? I mean, no disrespect, but that cartridge is literally 118 years old. They designed it before they even understood what made bullets fly straight." Darnell's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that Tyler was too young to recognize as warning. "Specialist Brennan, that man put more rounds downrange before you were born than you'll fire in your entire career. I suggest you watch and learn before you form opinions." Tyler shrugged, unconvinced. "I'm just saying, the science is settled. Modern cartridges have better BC, better sectional density, better everything. There's a reason nobody uses the 30-06 in serious competition anymore." Darnell almost smiled. Almost. Nobody except the man who won the Wimbledon Cup 3 times. The Wimbledon Cup is the most prestigious individual long-range rifle competition in America, held annually at Camp Atterbury, Indiana, and contested at 1,000 yards. Winning it once marks a shooter as exceptional. Winning it twice establishes a legacy. Winning it 3 times places a shooter among the immortals of the craft. Tyler had never heard of Walter Jessup, but then again, Tyler had only been shooting competitively for 2 years. The history of the sport stretched back more than a century, filled with names and achievements that the modern generation had largely forgotten. Walter had won his first Wimbledon Cup in 1971, his second in 1974, and his third in 1979. All 3 victories came with the same rifle he was now carrying to the firing line, a Winchester Model 70 that had been built in 1965 and had digested more than 50,000 rounds of 30-06 ammunition in the decades since. Walter settled into his position at the 1,000-yard line, moving with the deliberate economy of someone who had performed these motions so many times they had become automatic. He unfolded his shooting. Matt positioned his spotting scope and began loading rounds from a weathered ammunition box that bore handwritten notations on its lid. Tyler and the other soldiers took positions nearby, curious despite their skepticism. The wind was gusting from 7 o'clock at approximately 8 miles per hour, with occasional shifts that pushed it closer to 10. At 1,000 yards, even small variations in wind speed could push a bullet several feet off target. This was the distance where precision shooting became as much art as science, where reading conditions and understanding your rifle's behaviour mattered more than raw ballistic performance on paper. "Mind if I ask what load you're shooting?" one of the other soldiers inquired, a sergeant named Martinez who had noticed the handwritten markings on Walter's ammunition box. Walter looked up with eyes that had been assessing wind conditions for longer than any of these soldiers had been alive. 190 grain Sierra Match King, 47 grains of IMR 4050, seated to 3.240 inches overall length, Federal 210 primers. Martinez pulled out his phone and began running the numbers through a ballistics calculator. His eyebrows rose. "That's pushing. What, 2,600 feet per second? Maybe 2,650? Walter nodded. 2,640 at this altitude and temperature. I've been loading this exact recipe since 1968. Took me 2 years to develop it. Haven't changed it since." Tyler leaned over to look at the ballistics calculator on Martinez's phone. The numbers showed what he expected. At 1,000 yards, the 190 grain 30.06 bullet would drop approximately 35 feet from the bore line and drift nearly 4 feet in a 10-mile-per-hour crosswind. His 6.5 Creedmoor, by contrast, would drop only 29 feet and drift less than 3 feet in the same conditions. The math was clear. The modern cartridge was superior. "See what I mean?" Tyler said, keeping his voice low but not low enough. "He's fighting physics out there. My Creedmoor is going to shoot circles around that old warhorse." Walter either didn't hear the comment or chose to ignore it. He was studying the mirage through his spotting scope, watching the heat waves rise from the ground between his position and the distant targets, reading the subtle variations that told an experienced shooter what the wind was doing along the entire bullet path, not just at the firing line. The competition format was simple. Each shooter would fire 20 rounds for record at the 1,000-yard targets, with scoring based on the standard system, where the X-ring at the centre counted as 10 points, surrounded by progressively lower-scoring rings extending outward. The maximum possible score was 200 points with 20 X-ring hits. In competitive circles, anything above 195 was considered excellent shooting. Scores above 198 were exceptional. A clean 200 with multiple X-ring hits was the stuff of legend. Tyler fired first, eager to establish his dominance before the old man could embarrass himself. His custom rifle was a work of art, built on a Remington 700 Action with a match-grade barrel, adjustable stock, and a scope that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He settled into his position, consulted his ballistic data, and began his string of fire. The first shot broke cleanly. Tyler watched through his scope as the bullet struck the target, raising a small puff of dust just inside the 9-ring. Not a perfect start, but respectable. He adjusted his elevation, compensated for what he perceived as a slight wind shift, and fired again, another 9. His third shot found the 10-ring, and he began to settle into a rhythm. By the time he finished his 20-round string, Tyler had posted a score of 186 with 2 X-ring hits. It was a solid performance, certainly nothing to be ashamed of, but the wind had given him trouble throughout and several shots had drifted wider than he had anticipated. "Tough conditions today," Martinez offered diplomatically. Tyler nodded, not quite able to hide his frustration. He had expected to break 195 at minimum. The other soldiers fired their strings with similar results. Martinez posted a 182. A corporal named Washington managed a 179. Another specialist named Peters scratched out a 184. The wind was proving difficult for everyone, shifting unpredictably and refusing to establish a consistent pattern. Then it was Walter's turn. The old man rose from where he had been sitting quietly, observing the other shooters without comment. He walked to the firing line and lowered himself into prone position, with the careful movements of someone whose joints had seen better days but whose muscle memory remained intact. He didn't consult a ballistic calculator. He didn't fiddle with his scope turrets. He simply settled behind his rifle, placed his cheek against the worn stock, and began to breathe. For nearly a full minute, Walter didn't. Fire! He lay motionless, his eye fixed to the scope, watching something that the younger shooters couldn't see. Tyler exchanged glances with the others, wondering if the old man had frozen, if the pressure of the moment had gotten to him. Then Walter's finger moved. The rifle spoke. Through the spotting scopes, the soldiers watched as a fresh hole appeared in the target, dead center in the X-ring. Walter worked the bolt with practiced smoothness, ejecting the spent brass, chambering a fresh round, and returning his eye to the scope in a single fluid motion. His second shot landed so close to the first that it was impossible to tell where one hole ended and the other began. What followed, over the next 15 minutes, was a masterclass in precision shooting that none of the young soldiers would ever forget. Walter fired with a rhythm that seemed almost meditative, each shot following the last with the same unhurried deliberation. He didn't rush when the wind picked up. He didn't hesitate when conditions seemed to shift. He read the mirage, calculated the drift, and placed each bullet exactly where he intended it to go. When his final round punched through the target, the scorekeeper walked downrange to assess the damage. He returned with a target that looked like it had been attacked by a single, very large bullet. 20 shots had created a ragged hole barely 2 inches across, all of them inside the X-ring. A perfect 200 with 20 X-ring hits, at 1,000 yards, with a cartridge designed in 1906. The firing line went silent. Tyler stared at the target, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he thought he knew about ballistics. Martinez was shaking his head slowly, a grin spreading across his face. Even the range officers, veterans of countless competitions, were murmuring among themselves. Walter rose from his position, brushed the dirt from his jacket, and began packing his rifle away as if nothing remarkable had happened. Tyler found himself walking toward the old man before he consciously decided to do so. "Sir," he said, his voice stripped of its earlier condescension, "I don't understand. The numbers say that shouldn't be possible. My rifle has better ballistics on paper. How did you do that?" Walter looked at the young specialist for a long moment, and something in his expression softened. He recognized the confusion in Tyler's eyes because he had seen it before, in dozens of young shooters who had learned about rifles from computers and had never been taught by men who learned from war. "Son, let me ask you something," Walter said. "When you fired your string, how many times did you adjust your scope?" Tyler thought back. 6 or 7 times, I think, every time the wind shifted. Walter nodded. "And how did you know the wind had shifted?" "I watched the flags, and the mirage when I could read it." "Did you watch the conditions between you and the target, or just at the firing line?" Tyler opened, his mouth to respond, then closed it. The truth was, he had focused almost entirely on the wind flags at his position, occasionally glancing at the flags near the target, but mostly trusting his ballistic calculator to compensate for average conditions. Walter set down his rifle case and gestured toward the distant targets. "The bullet spends about 1.5 seconds travelling from this line to that target. In that time, it passes through 1,000 yards of air. The wind isn't the same across that entire distance. It swirls, it gusts, it does things the flags can't show you. The mirage tells you what's happening along the whole path if you know how to read it." He pointed to the heat waves shimmering above the ground. "See how the mirage is boiling straight up near the 500-yard line? That tells me the wind is calm there. But look at it closer to the target, how it's running from left to right. That's where the wind is pushing hardest. If you only compensate for what you see at the firing line, you'll miss." The old shooters, the men who developed these techniques before we had laser rangefinders and ballistic computers, they learned to read the whole picture. That's what I was doing when you thought I was frozen. I was watching the mirage until it told me the truth. Tyler absorbed this in silence. It was knowledge that didn't appear in any of the online content he consumed. Wisdom earned through decades of practice that couldn't be reduced to a YouTube tutorial. "But sir," he pressed, "what about the cartridge? Everyone says the 6.5 Creedmoor is ballistically superior. How can a 118-year-old design outshoot modern ammunition?" Walter allowed himself a slight smile. "Let me tell you something about the 3006 Springfield that they don't teach in the internet forums. This cartridge wasn't designed by amateurs. It was developed by the finest ordnance engineers at the Frankfurt Arsenal, refined through decades of military testing and optimized for exactly one purpose: putting bullets where they needed to go at distances from 0 to 1,000 yards. He pulled one of his hand-loaded rounds from the ammunition box and held it up. The original 3006 military ball ammunition was loaded with a 150-grain bullet at about 2,700 feet per second. That was in 1906. By 1926, the Army had developed the M1 ball round with a 174-grain boat-tail bullet that had a ballistic coefficient competitive with anything we shoot today. They figured out optimal bullet shapes, optimal velocities, optimal everything before your grandparents were born. The 6.5 Creedmoor is a fine cartridge, I'm not saying otherwise. But the men who designed the .3006 weren't primitive. They were solving the same problems with slide rules that we solve with computers, and their solutions still work. Walter paused, weighing whether to continue. What he saw in Tyler's eyes decided him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity. That was worth nurturing. There's another factor that nobody talks about anymore, Walter continued. Consistency over time. I've been loading this exact recipe, in this exact rifle, for 56 years. I know precisely what this combination will do in every condition I've ever encountered. I've fired these rounds in Louisiana heat and Minnesota cold, at sea level, and at 8,000 feet in Colorado. I've recorded everything. I don't need to calculate anymore. I just know. Can you say the same about your rifle and your cartridge after 2 years? The question landed like a precision shot. Tyler shook his head slowly. No, sir. I'm still figuring out what my rifle likes. That's not a criticism, Walter said. That's the reality of marksmanship. The cartridge matters less than most people think. What matters is knowing your rifle, knowing your ammunition, and knowing how to read conditions. I could take your 6.5 Creedmoor and shoot just as well with it, given a few years to develop loads and learn its personality. The cartridge is a tool. The shooter is the weapon. Martinez had joined them, drawn by the conversation. Sir, if you don't mind me asking, where did you learn all this? You mentioned the Wimbledon Cup, but that kind of knowledge doesn't just come from competition. Walter's eyes grew distant for a moment, looking at something beyond the firing line, beyond the Louisiana morning. I was a designated marksman in Vietnam with the 101st Airborne, 1967 to 1969. We carried M14 rifles chambered in 7.62 NATO, which is essentially the 3006's younger cousin. Same bullet diameter, similar performance. I learned to shoot in conditions that would make this look like a controlled laboratory. Jungle humidity that would rust your rifle overnight. Monsoon rains that turned everything to mud. Heat that made the mirage dance like nothing you've ever seen. He fell silent for a moment. I saw what precision shooting could do when it mattered. I saw how one man with a rifle could change the outcome of an engagement, could protect his brothers, could bring everyone home when the situation looked hopeless. After I came back, I couldn't stop shooting. It was the one thing from over there that I could keep doing without nightmares. The rifle became my way of remembering the craft without remembering everything else. The soldiers absorbed this in respectful silence. Whatever jokes they had been prepared to make about the old man and his obsolete cartridge had died somewhere between his perfect score and his quiet revelation about where he had learned to shoot. The .3006 Springfield, Walter said, his voice taking on a more instructive tone, has been in continuous service longer than any other centerfire rifle cartridge in American history. It was adopted in 1906, hence the name, 30 caliber bullet, 1906. It served as our primary military rifle cartridge through 2 world wars and Korea. The Springfield 1903 was chambered in it. The M1 Garand was chambered in it. The bar was chambered in it. When American soldiers stormed the beaches at Normandy, they were sending 30-06 rounds downrange. When my father fought in the Pacific, he carried a Garand loaded with the same cartridge I'm shooting today. He held up the round again, turning it in the light. 118 years of development. 118 years of ammunition manufacturers refining their processes, bullet makers perfecting their designs, handloaders publishing their findings. There is more institutional knowledge about making the 3006 perform than almost any other cartridge in existence. When I load these rounds, I'm building on the work of 3 generations of shooters who came before me. That knowledge compounds, it accumulates, it becomes something that a new cartridge, no matter how well designed, simply cannot match yet. Tyler looked down at his own rifle, suddenly seeing it differently. So you're saying the 6.5 Creedmoor will be this? Good eventually? Once people have been shooting it for 100 years? Walter nodded. Perhaps. If people keep shooting it, keep refining it, keep passing down what they learn. But that's not guaranteed. Cartridges come and go. The shooting world has seen dozens of revolutionary designs that were supposed to replace everything that came before. Most of them are footnotes now. The .264 Winchester Magnum was going to make the .36 obsolete in 1959. The 2-hour Remington was supposed to do it in 1957. The 7mm Well 8 was the answer in 1980. None of them did. The 30-06 is still here, still winning matches, still taking game, still proving that good design endures. Darnell Price had joined the group, having watched the entire exchange from a respectful distance. "Tell them about the versatility," he prompted. "That's something the young guns never appreciate." Walter smiled at his former student. The 30-06 can be loaded with bullets ranging from 110 grains to 220 grains. That's a spread that no other cartridge can match practically. With light bullets, it shoots flat enough for varmints. With 150 to 165 grain bullets, it's perfect for deer and antelope. With 180 grain bullets, it will handle elk and moose. With 200 to 220 grain bullets, it has cleanly taken every dangerous game animal in North America and most of what Africa has to offer. One rifle, one cartridge, and you can hunt the world. He gestured toward the distant targets. For competition, the 190 to 200 grain range offers the best combination of ballistic coefficient and manageable recoil. The long heavy bullets buck the wind better than lighter projectiles, and the 30-06 has enough case capacity to push them at velocities that keep them supersonic well past 1,000 yards. Your 6.5 Creedmoors starts with bullets in the 120 to 147 grain range. Excellent ballistic coefficients for their weight, yes, but less mass to resist wind deflection, less energy on target at extreme range. Different tools for different jobs. A corporal who had been listening from nearby spoke up. "Sir, I have to ask, if the 30-06 is so good, why did the military switch to the 7.62 NATO and then to the 5.56? Walter's expression acknowledged the fairness of the question. Logistics and weight. The 7.62 NATO is slightly shorter than the 30-06, which allows for lighter weapons with shorter actions. The 5.56 is smaller still, which means soldiers can carry more ammunition for the same weight. In military applications, volume of fire often matters more than precision at extreme range. The average combat engagement happens at distances where both cartridges perform similarly. The military made a rational decision based on their requirements," he paused, "but noticed they didn't abandon the 30 caliber entirely. Every squad still has a designated marksman with a 7.62 weapon. Every sniper team still carries rifles in calibers that trace their lineage back to the 30-06. When the shooting has to be precise, when one shot has to count, they reach for something with more authority than a 5.56. The military knows the difference between what works for everyone and what works when everything is on the line." The morning had shifted into early afternoon, and the competition had officially concluded, but no one seemed in a hurry to leave. The young soldiers had gathered around Walter like students around a master, their earlier dismissiveness completely forgotten. Questions flowed freely. How do you develop a load? How long does it take to truly know a rifle? What's the most important factor in long-range accuracy? Walter answered each question with patience and precision, drawing on 6 decades of accumulated wisdom. "The most important thing," he said finally, "is to never stop learning. The day you think you know everything about shooting is the day you start going backward. I'm 81 years old, and I learned something new last month about seating depth and pressure curves. The rifle will teach you if you're willing to listen. The cartridge will show you its preferences if you pay attention. The wind will tell you its secrets if you take the time to watch. Humility isn't weakness. It's the foundation of mastery." Tyler Brennan stood quietly at the edge of the group, his expensive rifle cradled in his arms. Something had changed in him over the course of the day. The easy certainty that had defined his shooting identity had cracked, and through the cracks, he could see how much he didn't know. It was uncomfortable. It was also, he realized, exactly what he needed. "Mr. Jessup," Tyler said, stepping forward, "I owe you an apology. What I said this morning about your cartridge being obsolete, about it belonging in a museum, that was ignorant. I was judging based on numbers on a screen instead of performance on the range. I'm sorry." Walter studied the young man's face, searching for sincerity. What he found satisfied him. "Apology accepted, and call me Walter. Mr. Jessup was my father." He reached into his range bag and pulled out a small notebook, its pages filled with handwritten data. I'm going to give you something, Tyler. This is a copy of my loading notes for the 3006. 56 years of development, every adjustment I've ever made, every lesson I've learned. I made this copy for my son, but he never took to shooting the way I hoped. Maybe you can make use of it. Not to abandon your 6th tier of Creedmoor, but to understand what a lifetime of dedication to a single cartridge can teach. Tyler took the notebook with something approaching reverence. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just use it. Learn from it. And when you're old and some young soldier tells you your cartridge is obsolete, you'll have your own notebook to pass on. Walter began gathering his equipment, signalling that his time at Camp Beauregard was drawing to a close. But before he left, he had one more lesson to impart. The 36 Springfield has survived for 118 years because it works. Not because it's perfect, not because it's the best at any single thing, but because it does everything well enough that no replacement has ever been compelling enough to matter. That's not obsolescence. That's the definition of a classic. The 1911 pistol is 113 years old. The lever-action rifle is 160 years old. The bolt-action rifle concept is 180 years old. Good design doesn't have an expiration date. He slung his rifle case over his shoulder. The newest cartridge will always have the newest technology behind it, but technology isn't wisdom. Data isn't knowledge. The men who designed the 36 understood physics, metallurgy, and ballistics at a level that still commands respect today. The men who have spent lifetimes shooting it have accumulated insights that cannot be downloaded or summarized in a video. When you dismiss something because of its age, you're not just disrespecting the thing itself. You're disrespecting everyone who carried it, everyone who mastered it, everyone who proved its worth under conditions that mattered. Walter walked toward the parking lot, his gait slow but steady. Behind him, a group of young soldiers watched in silence, their perspectives permanently altered by what they had witnessed. The old man with the old rifle and the old cartridge had outshot all of them combined, not through luck or favourable conditions, but through mastery so complete it seemed almost supernatural. The 3006 Springfield, the cartridge they had called Obsolete, had just delivered a lesson none of them would ever forget. In the weeks that followed, Tyler Brennan began a journey that would transform his shooting. He purchased a used Winchester Model 70 chambered in 3006, found a mentor who could teach him handloading, and started the long process of developing a relationship with a rifle that demanded patience. He still shot his 6.5 Creedmoor. He still appreciated its modern engineering, but he no longer believed that newer automatically meant better. He had learned that some things improve with age, that accumulated wisdom has value the latest technology cannot replace, and that an 81-year-old veteran with a 59-year-old rifle could humble anyone who thought otherwise. Master Sergeant Darnell Price continued to invite Walter back to Camp Beauregard for special training sessions. Word spread through the guard units about the old man who shot perfect scores at 1,000 yards, and soldiers began requesting transfers to units where they might have the chance to learn from him. A tradition was born, connecting the newest generation of American marksmen with knowledge that stretched back through Vietnam, Korea, the World Wars, and the original development of a cartridge that had proven itself across more than a century of service. The 3006 Springfield remains in production today, offered by every major rifle manufacturer, supported by every ammunition company, and shot by millions of hunters and competitors who understand what Walter Jessup demonstrated on that Louisiana morning. It is not obsolete. It is not outdated. It is proven, refined, and perfected by 118 years of continuous development. When a young shooter looks at those old cartridges and sees relics, they're missing the point entirely. They're looking at something that has worked longer than any of them have been alive, something that will still be working long after the latest wonder cartridge has faded from memory.